All right, well, it is 5 after, so we're going to go ahead and get going. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sarah, and I'm going to be walking through change management today. So we'll be talking about both our owner change or prime contract changes. We'll also be looking at the end at how to manage your vendor changes. So any changes to your subcontracts or purchase orders. But we're going to be using the same sample project we've been using for all of our webinars, the Lamanji Trattoria here. And just so as a reminder, right, to locate my project, I would come down to the projects menu and find it and click on it to enter the project. Otherwise, I can search for it up here in the search bar. But I'm here in my project. Now, my project is in progress. And if I need to adjust my prime contract with my owner at all, I would do so through the contract tab. And what you'll find is that in here, if you were with us during the pre-construction training, this is where our original proposal is housed, and we can see our current contract amount. If at any point we need to make a change to this total contract value, we need to process a change order. And that can be done as early as the request stage of your project, although I would say I more commonly see it happening in the in-progress stage. The reason being that in the request stage, right, your estimate is open and editable, so you could simply make the changes there and have them reflected as part of the original proposal and contract. So we'll go ahead and say that we need to make a change to this project, and we're going to hit the new icon to look at our options. We have the ability to create a potential change, and then we see this other option, the potential change order, that is currently grayed out. Now, we're going to walk through both today, but it's important to note that you have to make at least one potential change before you can make a change order. Now, these naming, the naming structure here is pretty similar, so I like to kind of explain the difference. A potential change is a single proposal for a change to the project that you will build out an estimate and proposal for. Whereas the change order is a summary document, which has the capability to be AIA style. And we would use that summary document to pass along one or more changes at the same time to our customer. So I might have 5 or 6 potential changes wrapped up into a single change order. Now we'll look at both. We'll see that you don't have to use the change order document if you don't want to, but it's there as an option. So we'll go ahead and hit create potential change. And you're going to see a set of steps here that's going to walk you through creating this change proposal. There are a few things you want to keep in mind here. One, you don't have to complete all of these steps at once. If you get through step 1 and you move on to step 2, then at any point you can hit the back button and back out of this. It'll be saved as a draft potential change. You can come back in and finish these steps in your own time, right? We don't design it to be done in 30 minutes. It could take days or weeks to finalize all the pieces of this change. The second thing to remember is that these steps are most of them listed as optional. So we don't have to use every single step. We will today to show you how that works, but you might have certain changes that don't require you to use certain steps. And then the last thing to keep in mind is that these steps, while they can look a little intimidating, these are essentially the same as your original pre-construction process. Think of it as if you were building a miniature project. You're going through those same little steps. You're building, adding any plans and specs, building your miniature cost estimate, gathering quotes for that cost estimate, and then making your mini schedule of values that will then be added to the main schedule of values for the project. So all of this should look very familiar. If we don't go into something in enough detail for you today, feel free to look back at our pre-construction webinar, because that webinar will dig into some of these features a little bit more deeply, because here we're going to assume you've seen them and used them before. So step 1, I'm going to go ahead and fill out the scope. You can see that a lot of this is filled in for me. There's really 2 key pieces that I need to take a close look at, and that's going to be the scope change name. So what are we doing? And let's go ahead and say we're adding an additional dining porch, right? We decided that we needed some outdoor dining area or some additional outdoor dining area. Our customer would like to add that. We're going to go ahead and propose that for them. The rest of these items are copied from the original proposal, the original contract. So unless you need to change them, you can leave them as they are. The last thing you really want to take a look at is the change type here. We have two types, customer and internal changes. And in case you're uncertain which one is which, you've got a definition here underneath. The customer change is for anything that needs to be approved by your customer and most likely will carry a change to the contract value. So if we're passing on any additional cost or charges to our customer, it's certainly going to be a customer change. An internal change would be for something that either doesn't carry a cost, or if it does, we as the general contractor are absorbing that cost. So it does not require approval by our customer, right? We don't want to run into those situations where we're absorbing costs because we accidentally left something off the original proposal, but it happens. So you've got the internal change for that. You've also got the ability to use that internal change if all you need to do is update plans and specifications. Remember, your addendum feature that you use in pre-construction is no longer available when you're in progress. So if you need to update plans and specs during the in progress stage, an internal change is the correct way to do that. And you would simply fill out steps 1 and 3 and then authorize. Now we're going to go through a customer change today because that's the most tricky option, right? And it's going to allow us to go through all of these steps and show you how they work. I can add performance constraints or work description here the same way I would on my original project creation screen. I can move to the next step either by hitting next step or by simply clicking the step on the left-hand side that I want to go to. Now, after I told you that all of this is similar to pre-construction, step 2 is the only one you won't recognize from pre-construction. Step 2 gives me a list of affected vendors, and that's going to show me anyone with whom I already have an existing commitment on this project. So you can see I already have, looks like a concrete PO for Able Pavement and Concrete. Well, they might be involved in paving this additional dining porch. And if they are, I'm going to want to check the box for 2 reasons. One, if I check this box, we are going to take this cost code for concrete and drop it right into step 4 for you. So that saves you time and makes sure you don't forget it or accidentally grab the wrong cost code, a similar one when you get down here to step 4. It's also going to take this vendor, Able Pavement, and create them a ready-made RFQ in step 5 so that I can send them a request for quote asking how much those additional funds are going to be, right? How much is it going to cost us for them to pave that dining porch? We don't have to select anyone here, but if we do, it saves us time in steps 4 and 5. So we're going to go ahead and leave that selected. Notice I can pick a point of contact for this change. If I'd like, I can go ahead and indicate who will be sending that RFQ out to. So before we move forward, though, I'm just going to stop and check, are there any questions at all? I'm not seeing any in chat or QA.
Oh, no questions yet, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and move forward. Our next step is plans and specifications. And like I said, this is going to function identically to the original plans and specs feature. The only difference being that when I go ahead and add new plans and specs, notice you've got the add and the import options just like you did. When I add new plans and specs, if I upload a single file, which I'm going to do here, we'll call this version change 01 and add a drawing. We'll make that architectural, right? When I go ahead and add a single page, and I'm moving through this quickly again. Remember, we assume you've seen plans and specs before, but I'm going to go ahead and add just a sample PDF here so that you can see the supersede capability. That's something you'll have seen in the addendums feature. And again, remember that as we upload these, it may take a moment or 2 for them to load. So you can either back out of the screen and come back to it, or if you go back up a step and come back down, it'll refresh the page for you. And you can see there, mine is processing OCR, which means we've got our optical recognition software scanning to name and number that file. But once that's done, what we'll see is that I can supersede existing files on the project. So I can go ahead and do that. We'll allow that to process and we'll come back to it in a moment. If you have a large number of files, remember, we will email you when your files are done uploading. Oh, look, there it is. Perfect. Then let's go ahead and review. There's what I really wanted you to see, right? You're familiar with how to scan your documents, how to put in the name and number, but this supersede field that we normally only see in the addendums, We see it here in the change order, so that if we need to supersede a previous drawing, we'll see all of our plans and specs in this dropdown. We can search for them by name. We don't have to scroll through an enormous list. We just pick what we want, and notice it auto-populates the number and name for me. So then as I save that, what I'm going to find is that these new plans and specs will not immediately supersede the prior copies on the project. They will have a note here. They are superseded by the original copy, version 001, dated December 2nd, until such time as we authorize this change. When this change is authorized, this will become the new current copy of that drawing. So we do still have to commit it. Notice that is in a draft status. We won't be able to authorize this change until all of our plans and specs are committed. So let's do that. Again, we could come back to this step over time while we prep this change. It doesn't all have to be done in order. So we can go do some estimating and come back and add more. But we're going to go down to our cost estimate. If we did not pick any affected vendors in step 2, this cost estimate will be empty and we'll start from scratch the same way we would in the pre-construction stage. But we chose that concrete vendor in step 2. So we already see that concrete cost code in here. And all we have to do is open that up. We can see we've got a nice master assembly in here. It looks like a really nice detailed one. So lots of line items. Yours may not be that detailed. You may just have a lump sum subcontract item. And that's the one I'm going to use here today. I'm just going to put in a lump sum value and say this is going to cost us $4,200. We estimate for our concrete subcontractor to pave that particular porch that we're creating, right? And in fact, I think we had a PO up there. So this is a nice moment to mention that you want to make sure you budget your money into the same category. So if that vendor already has a PO, I don't want to budget my money in subcontract. So I'm actually going to change this to materials so that I know I'm creating a materials line item for $4,200. That way, when the time comes, I can increase their PO with a corresponding vendor change, right? If I had written them a subcontract to begin with, then I would want to budget my money here under subcontract. So just nice budgeting details to be aware of so that everything lines up nice and pretty. But we've got our lump sum materials cost in there. We can be as detailed as we want. We can add additional cost codes. Even if we didn't have an affected vendor for them, we may have other costs that we're going to self-perform or that we need to write a new commitment for with a new vendor. We won't go into too much more detail here with estimating, except to say that this estimate page functions exactly the same as your original estimate page. We will carry over any supplemental markups that you've used in your original estimate, and we will carry over the type of proposal and the fee percentage. However, you can change any of these if you need. You do not have to have the same type of proposal for your change that you do for your original proposal. So I could have a fixed price original proposal and a time and material style change or construction management, whatever I prefer. And then of course, you can adjust the fee, but we're going to assume you want to keep your fee the same as what you set up in your original estimate. Any questions at all there on our plans and specs or estimating?
Looks like we're good.
Awesome. Then we're going to move on down to vendor quotes, which is where we would ask any existing vendors what additional costs we will incur. And we could invite new vendors. So if they aren't already a part of the project, but we do need to cover some new work, we can go ahead and send out new RFQs right from here. This page functions identically to your standard RFQ page. You can create your request for quote for new vendors that you want to invite by cost code, and you can upload unsolicited quotes. If you already have quotes for this change on hand, you don't need to send out invites to your vendors. You can just upload them here. Now we're going to play with this one that we've created down below for Able Pavement and Concrete. It's already here because we said they were our affected vendor. We know we're going to incur additional costs with them. So it's here, it's ready, but we do want to hit the pencil because there's a couple key required fields that we'll need to fill out before we can go ahead and send this out. One of those being the default category. right? So that's going to be the cost category. It filled in the cost code of concrete. But again, we want to go ahead and pick materials because that's where we budgeted the money and that's what their original commitment is under. We can pick a point of contact if we haven't already. Who do we want to send this email out to? So we can go ahead and check that box. And then we want to set our required date. What's the due date? We need their bid by next Friday, right? We can put in a time of day if we'd like, or any special instructions. Notice here, you'll be familiar with our original RFQs. We always send a full set of plans and specifications. In a change order RFQ, we will ask you if you'd like to send all of them or just the ones associated with this change. So if I uncheck the box, I'm including all plans and specifications on the project. If I leave the box checked, I'm including just that one item, that one document that I uploaded in step 3. So it's up to you what you prefer, but this helps kind of pare it down to the pertinent information for your vendors. Any special instructions here? And then we can add any other attachments in addition to plans and specs that we may need. And we'll just go ahead and hit save. We can always view it, right? The next step, if you're actually going to email it out, would be to view it, make sure it looks good, commit it, and then hit the email button. However, we're not going to actually send this one out. So we're going to say we've reviewed it. The document looks good. We'll go ahead and commit it, right? We want to finalize it, remove the draft watermark from that RFQ, and then we would view this and email it out. Your vendor is going to receive an email that says you've been requested to quote, please click here to view the RFQ. And when they click the link, this is the form that they will come to. They're going to be able to review this document, and in the top right-hand corner, they are going to have a big red button that says upload quote. So you can see here our request for quote. It tells them that it's a potential change and what the due date is. We can see all the basic information for the change. If you put in any constraints or work description, those are here. And then there's our plans and specifications for that one document. And it's also telling them, right, it may supersede the original, but it hasn't yet. This is a potential change. So if we go back over here, we're going to assume that we sent this out to your vendor and that they have responded. Of course, you should know already, if you were with us for that webinar, that you do have a backdoor option to answer on behalf of your vendors. So if they had any trouble, you can come in here and convert to quote for them, which allows you to just go ahead and put in their quote value as they've sent it to you, whether that's by email or verbal over the phone or whatever the case may be. We can go ahead and say they're bidding $41.50. We can upload a copy of their itemized quote. In fact, I'm going to, because you'll see how that comes into play with the vendor change. So we'll upload that PDF and say that that is a copy of their quote. And then the last thing to keep in mind is that down here, if you're answering on their behalf, you'll need to check the box for the items that are included in their quote, right? So if I have an assembly list of a dozen items that fall under that cost code, my vendor may say I can only provide 10 of those 12 items. So in this case, we know we only wanted them to be bidding on this one materials line item. So that's what we'll check the box for, and we'll save. Once that saves, their bid is in. And remember, we have the ability, and this is a quote that we put in, so it's a draft, right? If your vendor answers on their own, you won't need to commit it. It will come in a committed status. But so here's our bid, right? $41.50. It's telling us that that's $50 under what we put in our estimate. So we'd be saving money if we went with this vendor. And we do have our select as best feature. So once all of your quotes come in, or in this case, it's a pretty simple change. We know who's going to perform the work. So we can come into the select as best option by clicking on the star, and we can select from all of the vendors. We'd have one column for each vendor who bid on this cost code, and we could select the one that we want to utilize. Now, if we go all the way to the bottom, you can see the comparisons there. You're going to have a copy of their quote. If you want to look at it, you can leave yourself some notes. But by selecting as best, what I'm doing is tailoring my own estimate automatically. I'm saying this is who I'm going to use. Please replace my estimate amount with their bid amount of $41.50. So we'll hit OK. It's going to go ahead and load, and it'll highlight that they are selected as best for us. You can always come back here and unselect if you determine you want to change to a different vendor, or you don't want to use this select as best feature to tailor your estimate. When we close this back out, you can see their stars highlighted gold, so we can tell which quote we chose. And if we go back to the cost estimate, we're going to see that that concrete line item lump sum has been filled in, $41.50 for Able Paving. And the reason you see these duplicated is because there's a whole bunch of additional line items under that concrete assembly that haven't been bid on yet. So it kind of split out that single materials lump sum line item for us, whereas all the other line items stayed here underneath concrete in case we were going to have a different vendor bid on those. So from there, once we've gathered all of our quotes, we've decided who's going to perform the work, and we've allowed that to tailor our estimate. We double check that our price looks correct, right? We have everything in that we want. Oops. And then we're ready to move past vendor quotes to schedule of values. Now, schedule of values here is listed as optional, but I will say that I highly recommend filling it out at this time to prevent yourself from forgetting to adjust the master SOV on the project down the road. So what I can do here is go ahead and build out the line items that I would like to appear on my customer's bill to account for these additional change order dollars. Now, if you want to incorporate these dollars into your existing SOV line items, then it might be reasonable to choose not to build one here. But if you want to see a separate line item or multiple separate line items to account for this change on your bill, then you definitely want to build a schedule of values here and now. We have the same options for building it that we do in the master SOV. I can build it one line at a time, or I can bring it in from other projects or from the estimate, or I can bring it in from a spreadsheet outside of RedTeam. Now, the quickest and easiest is generally to bring it in from the estimate because you've already built it here in step 4. That allows me to choose whether I want to bring it in by cost code, cost division, or assembly, and whether I want to allocate out my overhead and profit. Remember, no allocations means I want my customer to see an overhead line and a profit, or and a profit line, excuse me. Overhead and profit there. If I say allocate indirect costs, that would hide the overhead costs and still show a profit line. Allocating both means that those dollars are still included in the charges, but they are kind of hidden amongst the other line items within that SOV. So we're going to go with no allocation so that you can see what that looks like. Notice I can include the cost code number or division if I want. We'll pull that in here, and we're going to see a whole bunch of line items here for our profit, and these look like all supplemental markups. So we've got our $41.50 there, our overhead and profit, and then all of these down here are supplemental markups that have been added to our cost estimate. Remember, I said we were going to pull in all those supplemental markups from your original cost estimate. So these are consistent with all the markups we were charging on our original estimate. Hopefully you don't have quite that many of them. But what's really important is that once we import, we are seeing that this gray total down here matches our change order total. So these have to match penny for penny to make sure that we don't end up overbilling or underbilling the customer on the agreed upon amount. So here we can see everything that we put in. We can determine if we need to make any edits. There's no reason you couldn't combine some of these line items or delete if you need to. You can edit the way that they read if you don't like the way, you want this to say maybe fee instead of profit. You can rename it. Now, if I were to have allocated out overhead and fee, lines 2 and 3 would not exist. This money would be dumped into that concrete cost code because we're going to spread that money. When you hit allocations, we're going to spread that money across all your direct cost codes. We will not spread it across the markups so that those stay clearly visible for your customer. But this is not our final chance to make sure that this SOV looks the way that we want. but it certainly gets us started, and we're going to have one more chance to review it before we authorize. So again, once you're happy with the way it looks and the numbers match, you're ready to move on and get your proposal ready to send out. So here we are on the change proposal form. Again, same exact steps as getting your original proposal document ready. You're going to double check that you have the right proposal format, construction management or fixed price, right? I think we had a fixed price cost estimate, so that's the one we're going to go with. Most of our clients will only see one proposal format per proposal type. So if you chose fixed price, the only option will be fixed price. If you chose construction management, the only option will be construction management. Here in our training database, we've built a lot of extra proposal forms, but unless you see a need for additional types, you'll just have one default option. Proposal date here can be changed with the calendar. Down here is your scope of work, and you can determine if you want to include that by cost division, by cost code, or by assembly, right? Which is showing all of our assembly line items. We can even include the narrative or our descriptions of each line item, right? We're going to go ahead and say by cost code. We can also do it by work description, and that would show any work description that we typed in step 1. We see our proposed change amount here. That's coming directly from the cost estimate. That's your total price number from the cost estimate. We do also have the option to unlink from estimate. I generally see that as something that's used by folks who have a very simple change where they don't feel the need to build an estimate. They'd like to be able to type in their own proposed change amount. Just know that if you use unlink from estimate, A, it's going to lock out your estimate, so you can't make any other changes or utilize it. And B, you will only be able to include your scope of work by work description. It won't pull anything in from the estimate. So by far, the more popular option is link to estimate. We do have the option to add value-added tax here. If you have tax venues set up, you'll see them here in the dropdown. If not, you can add those tax venues in your configuration menu as an administrator. And then we do need to fill in the time and punch duration impact here. Notice the orange asterisks. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is going to add 2 days to the project and 1 day to our punch duration. We can also update our proposal expiration. Our default is 30 days. We can add in any clarifications or alternates. Remember, we have a default list for you to choose from, but you can also add your own down here, clarifications or alternates that may have an amount. Once they're added in, I can arrange them in a particular order by dragging and dropping, or I can click the pencil to edit how that is described or the dollar value associated if it's an alternate. Proposal attachments. We've got some nice one-click attachments there. Remember, you can include your plans and specs. In this case, it'll ask if you want to include all of them or just the ones associated with this change, those from step 3. We can include that mini schedule of values from step 6, and we can include our selected vendors from step 5 if we want. Remember, that's going to include an actual copy of their quote. So if you don't want the customer seeing those attached quote files, then you don't want to use this option. But that's going to tell them not only who you used, but allow them to see a copy of that quote. And of course, unit prices, if you'd like to include those. Any other attachments can be added here. There's no limit to the number of attachments you can add, as long as each one is one of these orange allowed file types and each one is under 25 megabits. If you have authorization already, you can go ahead and put in the change ID and contract date. If not, that's okay to leave those blank. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. And again, remember, this is a draft. We can come back and edit any of these pieces up until the point when we hit commit pricing. So I would like to view our proposal first. I generally want to take a look before I finalize everything. So we'll view that proposal that we'll be sending out to the customer. It's going to look pretty similar to what we sent out for the original proposal. The formatting is the same. You're going to have your title of your change here. You're going to have your scope of work right down here. So notice this scope of work we brought in by cost code, and it does include all those supplemental markups. There's concrete, right? And it included all the line items for concrete. So you can determine how detailed or not you want this to be. We've got our price. We have our duration being increased by 2 days. And then we can see our clarifications and alternates here. And it's going to list your attachments, but those will be shown on separate pages. So as we come down here, we've got a space for acceptance and signature. There's our plans and specs. Again, letting you know this one may supersede the original, but has not yet. There's our schedule of values. And there's our selected vendors. So it's telling us for the concrete cost code, we chose Able Pavement and Concrete. And if we click on their name in blue, we will be able to see a copy of their quote. And that's the same format that your customer is going to see this in. They'll open this from their email and they'll be looking at exactly what you're looking at right now. So if we're ready and we like the way it looks, we commit the pricing and we can send it out to them. If not, we can come back and make edits. But we're going to go ahead and commit. That finalizes this potential change, and then it's going to take us back to the contract tab where we see that this potential change is in a proposal status. If it's in a request status, that means it's a draft and you can hit the pencil to walk back through any of those steps and edit. Once it's a proposal, it's finalized. So we've got two options on how to proceed from here. If we're happy with that proposal form, and this is our only change right now, we can send that out, email that directly to our client. And when they approve, or if they approve, we can come here to the tools icon and authorize this change to apply it to the contract value. However, if you need to provide your client with an AIA style change order document, or you have multiple changes and you'd like to loop them all into a single summary document, you've got the ability to create that change order document. So if I want to create a change order, I need to checkbox the potential change or changes that I want to include. And then I'm going to get this nice blue button to create a potential change order. This is much simpler than filling out the potential change, right? The potential change is the hard work. The change order as a summary document just needs a few details. So we'll fill in this one page. It wants us to give it a PCO or potential change order name or number. I'm going to call it 001. But we could call this potential change building one changes, whatever we want to call it. Date there, format. Generally, the most common option that I see is the AIA style 2001. We do have the prior AIA style, and then you'll see the standard format. These two are kind of custom options that were built within our training database. So that is possible for you to build additional formats. But most likely you'll be using one of these three, the AIA style or the standard format. Remember, if you pick one and you don't like it, it's a draft. So you can always come back and change that and take a look at it in another format. Our project manager, Ashley's been filled in. We need to give this request a name. Now, that might seem strange in this situation because I already named my change. But imagine if I had 10 changes in this one change order. I might want to give it a name that indicates what those changes have in common. So we'll just go ahead and say additional dining spaces, because maybe we're adding some outdoor and some indoor dining, and we have a couple different changes to represent both. We can then, in our narrative, describe all changes included. Right? You've got plenty of space there. You can drag down this corner and type a couple paragraphs if you need to. And then you designate who your signatories are. So where it says architect and owner, those are the titles of your signatories. You'll have your own signature space for the general contractor. Whoever else you need to sign, you put their title in here, and then you go ahead and pick who that is. So we'll go ahead and say Aaron is our architect, and for our owner, our customer is Disney, and we're going to go ahead and select Mickey. He's going to be our signatory for the owner. We can see what changes we've included here, and we've got a chance with the checkboxes to kind of change our mind and make sure we're including the right changes. Once we hit save, that's all there is to creating the change order document. So before we commit it, as always, we should probably take a quick look, make sure it looks the way we intended. So in here, what we're seeing is this AIA style change order. And you can see each of your potential changes that you've built listed here. It's going to summarize the days and dollars that are being added to the contract. And you're going to see the effects on the contract total here down below. Now, if you're thinking to yourself that this single page document loses a lot of the detail that we saw in the change proposal, you're not losing that change proposal at all. Here with the hyperlink, I can go ahead and click, and that takes me to a full copy of this proposal, right? The same one we looked at earlier. So all of those proposals, if you had 10 changes, all 10 proposals will be available to the customer, but they have this summary document to see what's happening to their contract total and to sign to approve them all at once if that's something that they want to do. So you can see our 3 signatories there. And then from there, if we're happy with this document, we just need to remove the draft watermark. So we would come back over here and we would hit commit. Now, once it's committed, we see it here still under potential customer changes. This is potential change order 001. And if we expand out, we can see each potential change that was included in that change order underneath. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is the term scope in RedTeam Flex means something a little bit different than a lot of our GCs are used to. When we talk about what scope of the project is it, we're asking, does it come from the original contract or a change order? So you can see each of these changes gets its own scope number. The original contract is scope 00. Each change that you authorize after that gets its own sequential scope number. And that's going to come into play when we look at the budget and when we handle vendor changes to make sure we're drawing the money from the right spot in the budget. So let's imagine that our owner, Mickey, has gone ahead and approved this change. So we would come here and hit the tools icon and we would authorize. And that's going to walk us through just a little bit of information, including uploading the signed proposal documents. So we're going to go ahead and say when this was authorized. Move down to schedule of values. Now this is giving me a chance to make final edits to my schedule of values. This might be exactly what I want to see, right? We're going to preface each of these line items that you built with the change order number and the scope number. So change order 001 might have included 3 different scopes, right? We only had 1, but you'll see both of those indicated. If you like that format, leave it. But something to think about is that this one scope had dozens or 19, let's see, 19 line items, right? Imagine you had 4 separate changes, each with 19 line items. Do you really want to add that many new items to your SOV and to your bill? Or is that going to look cluttered and confusing to your customer? So this is your chance to determine exactly what you want to push to the bill. And in that case, I can go ahead and delete or combine line items. I can add additional or arrange them in a different order. I also have this lovely combine items button, which allows me to say, you know what I'd really like? I'd like to see one line item for this entire change order with just the total. If that's how you like to do it, you can go ahead and hit combine items. And it's going to very quickly make it a single line item change order 001, which again might include 3, 4, 5 different scopes or changes. And then you'll see the total value here. So if I'm happy with that, great. If you do this and you change your mind, just hit the back button and then hit authorize again, because there's not really an undo button. But if you back out without authorizing, you can come back in here and it'll be exactly the way it was before. So if I'm happy with my SOV, the only thing I need to double check before I move on is that this total change amount matches the total SOV amount. Again, remember they should match penny for penny, and then we're ready to move on. Attachments here is where we would go ahead and upload all of our signed proposal documents. Notice you can load up to 100 files here. Let's go ahead and add. We'll grab our sample PDF there. We can select which scope that pertains to. So again, if there were 10 changes on this change order, I can indicate which of those 10 changes this is a document for. And we'll say sign proposal. And we'll upload it. We can upload more files if we want. Otherwise, we've got our confirmation that this is not a PCO anymore. It's not potential. It is now a change order. And we can go ahead and close. And there it is as an authorized customer change. We would have a separate heading down below to continue tracking any other potential changes. And we can see the new contract total right there. So it's going to go ahead and track that for us. Now, the last things I want to show you before we look at vendor changes are what did that do to our budget and what did that do to our SOV? If we go look at the budget, we can come in here and we can choose to filter by scope. If we group by scope, we're going to be able to see the original contract budget up top. And as we scroll down, we see scope change 1 for additional dining porch. And that's showing me all of my markups in addition to my concrete cost code, right? So if I look at my budgeted amounts, that's including all my supplemental markups, and then there's the concrete line item. So if I had concrete costs in the original budget, and I also have concrete costs in this change, I want to be able to track separately the costs that I incur and the money that I budgeted. So that view by scope is really helpful. As for the schedule of values, if I come to the home icon, and I take a look at my master SOV for the project, you're going to see that that line item has been added. So if we scroll down to the bottom, we see that change order 001 is in here, and the totals match identically for the total contract amount with all changes and the total SOV. This is one of those places that folks can sometimes get off on their schedule of values, is if you didn't match this amount up to the change amount perfectly, or let's say I authorize this change and then I realize I made an error and I need to go back and correct it. I deauthorize the change, I make my corrections, I reauthorize. When you push it and authorize it again, we're going to push that line item or line items to the SOV a second time. So we do automatically add to the SOV as you authorize a change. We don't automatically pull that line item back when you deauthorize a change. So if you find yourself in that situation, that's one of the reasons I like to advise that if you get that warning, hey, your SOV doesn't match the contract total, one of the best places to go look as to explain why is the contract tab. Because if I come to the contract tab and I say, you know what, the difference between my SOV and my contract total is 6878.13. If it matches one of your changes exactly, then chances are, right, you double authorized that change, which is fine. You're allowed to go back and make corrections, but just make sure you straighten out your SOV before you begin billing, right? If there's a difference, you don't want to bill. But that should do it for our customer changes. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or the Q&A, but please feel free to drop them there if you have any. Otherwise, we're going to go take a quick look at vendor changes. These are much more simple. Really, the process for a vendor change is almost identical to the process for creating an original subcontractor purchase order. You'll find that the steps are exactly the same. When I come to the buyout tab, on any of my existing purchase orders or subcontracts, if at any time I need to change the total dollar value, I can simply come in here to the tools icon and choose create a change order. Now, you might create a change order for any number of reasons. Maybe you got invoiced a little bit more than you expected to see for your concrete mix here. If that's the case, I am not able to invoice over $2,200 because that's the commitment total. So I would need to process a change order. Hey, they went $50 over for whatever reason. I can add that in. If I need to reduce the value, I can give them a credit, right? And put a negative change order in. Or in the case that we're going to look at today, I had an owner change that requires them to perform significantly more work. And I'm going to need to create a change order, a follow-on change order for my vendor to account for that additional money or the additional work that's happening based on that owner change. So I'm going to go ahead and click create change order. This pulls up the same steps that you're used to seeing for creating a subcontractor a PO. The difference is that most of the mandatory fields here are already filled in. We've copied them over from the original PO for you. So you just need to double check them and make sure things look good. But first, I'm going to go ahead and go back to step 1 because I want to show you how to pull in a quote if you have one. So if I go back up to step 1, you notice it skipped over step 1 because it already knows what vendor I'm working with for this PO. But there's the quote that we put in for that change order, that owner change in scope 01. If I want to use that quote to fill in step 3 for me, I can come back up to step 1 and check the box. It's warning me, hey, make sure you check us in step 3, right? This just helps you bring in that total and it itemizes it out in the way you had it built in the estimate. It's also going to attach a copy of that vendor's quote in step 6 so that you can send it to them as a reference point. So we'll make our way back down to step 2. Again, most of this is going to be the same, but I just want to double check, right? My subject is concrete mix. We can say additional dining porch, right? We want to include the title of that owner change, maybe. But cost code and category should stay the same. We can indicate who at that vendor we're going to be in touch with if we want to, but we don't have to. Payment terms and taxes, we can change if necessary, but they do copy themselves over. And then if there's any additional custom fields down here for your particular PO or subcontract, you can go ahead and fill those in. Products and services. Remember, we can build out the scope of work or the schedule of values here, whatever you may call it. We can build this out as we wish, however we want to see it on the change order for the vendor and however we want to see it when we're processing the invoice. So if I'm happy with this single line item, that's great. It would show me the total for the cost code, and then it would actually show me a list of all the items that were included. So if under concrete, I had built mix, forms, labor for installation, whatever the case may be, I would see all those listed here with $0 values, indicating that they're included in the 4150 total for concrete. But of course, you can come in here and check the box to update or edit these. You can delete them and add your own items, however you wish to format this. But once you're happy with the way this looks, you just move on to your next step. Remember, steps 4, 5, and 6 are optional, but they're nice reminders. So this is just showing me whether we have any required credentials from our original PO. If we don't, we won't see anything here, but we did. It looks like we asked for a W-9 and a license number on that original PO, and we have those. You see the green OK tells us those are on file within their vendor profile. Now, if we see a red indication here, it's expired or it's not on file, we'll have an upload button off to the right where we can add it. We can also add additional documents that we might need. I need automobile liability or blanket agreement, whatever the case may be, performance bond before I pay them. I can go ahead and add, and it's going to tell me whether they have it on file. Submittals here. We'll see all the submittals that are existing for this particular cost code. And if we need any more, we can go ahead and hit add. Of course, this can also be done from the submittals tab. So if it's not something you want to do at this moment, you don't have to. Attachments there. This gives you one last chance to add any attachments. You can go ahead and add them right there if you need. And then we'll go ahead and check the confirmation, which is just going to show us that we have the right scope, the right cost code, and the right amount. And actually, I'm going to go back up to scope. One of the great reasons I like this confirmation, it allows me to double check that things are going to fall into the right spot in the budget. And in this case, I'm making a change to this vendor for something that's part of scope 01, that additional dining porch change. But I told it to draw the money from the original budget, which is not what I want. So let's go back up to step 2 and let's correct the scope. That's one of those things you'll want to pay close attention to. And I kind of breezed past it here, right? If I'm pulling the money from the original budget, the answer is original. If I'm pulling the money from a change order budget, I want to select that change order. And then you also get the chance to say, hey, if it is related to a change, an owner change, do you want to include just the plans and specs for that owner change? Or do you want all the plans and specs on the project? Now we can come back down to configure or to confirmation, excuse me, and double check, right? We got the right scope, change order 1. We got the right cost code for concrete, and we have the right total, 4150. We don't need any credentials, so we're ready to just view this document and send it out. So there is our change order document, very similar to your purchase order or subcontract forms, except it's missing a lot of that normal contract language. You're just going to have the step 2 here, the contract terms you filled in will be up top. There's your products and services, whether you call that scope of work or schedule of values, itemized price, whatever you call it, it'll be listed out here. And then any exhibits, right? We have some kind of sample exhibits in our purchase order, change order form. But you do have the ability to kind of customize this form a little bit in your commitment forms section in configuration. So if we're happy with it, we'll go ahead and commit it and we'll email it out. If not, we've got the pencil to go back and make changes. Remember, when we commit a vendor change, we are committing money to the budget. So just like when we made the original PO or subcontract, we are going to get a pop-up asking us if we'd like to adjust the at-risk. This is another place where you might notice if you had assigned it the wrong scope, because you can see here it's telling me, hey, for scope 1, cost code, concrete, you budgeted $41.50 for materials. You just committed $41.50 for materials. How much do you still expect to spend to finish off this line item? The answer is hopefully 0, and I would reduce my at-risk to 0. But if I know that circumstances dictate I'm going to need to spend another $500 that I have not yet committed, I could go ahead and indicate that here. So someone with the knowledge to do the forecasting is who's going to want to be adjusting this at risk to say, this is what we still expect to spend that we have not committed or spent yet. And then we'll hit save. But like I said, if you chose the wrong scope, what would happen is this will be selected to original. And you'd say, hey, well, you budgeted 10,008. But you know, you can see here under materials, right? We budgeted 1875. You're going to go, well, where's, you know, I didn't budget enough money. I can't reduce my at-risk anymore, right? You're going to be looking over budget because you're drawing the money from the wrong scope. So just something to keep in mind. That's why it's important to choose the right scope as you're creating these changes. We'll hit save. We can view the commitment again and email it out. We don't need to in this case because I'm not actually going to email it today. But what we can see here is now in the buyout tab, this second item is our change order for that original concrete mix PO. And I can identify a change, a vendor change in comparison to the original PO or subcontract by this big white space, right? It doesn't have its own PO number because it's nested right under the parent. And I can identify that it's a change also from this modification column. This is modification 01 of the purchase order above it, which is modification 00. So similar to the scope term that we see with the contract, this is scope 00. This money for this PO was drawn from the original contract scope. This money was drawn from the change order scope, right? The modifications indicate essentially the scope number for that PO. Right, the original PO versus modification 01. You can make multiple changes per commitment form. You don't have to have just one. And no matter which one you come to say create vendor invoice, you will be invoicing these as a whole. So you will be able to invoice against this PO up to a total of $6,350. Right, so you don't need to invoice the original and the change separately. But that should be all there is to it. Of course, this one shows committed. When I get the signed copy back from my vendor of that change order, I would just come in here and change the status to executed, which allows me to then upload the signed copy of that change order. And I can do that right here. We can drag and drop. Of course, if you're using DocuSign, you don't need to. It'll go ahead and bring it in for you once all signatures are obtained. So there we've uploaded that. We'll close our form out, and now they both show executed, and you can see the signed copies on file right here in the source column. So with that, again, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or QA. I'll hang around for a moment if anyone has any questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for attending the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you 2 weeks from now for our next webinar.